Wassie Lugolobi flipped to Stanford?
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Lockdown Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax, for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed. Head over to TurboTax.com and get matched with your expert. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're going to talk about some of the expectations that we have for what the low end of Washington's 2026 recruiting class is going to look like. Obviously, we shoot for much higher than what the minimum might be, but I think we should set a floor for a couple of reasons that we're going to get to throughout the course of the show. One of them being plenty of official visits have been set up. You know, Mason James, Anthony Jones, Brian Bonner, Sam Utu, a bunch of high-end four-star prospects. We're going to get into a couple of those, just a couple names that are standing out to us for one reason or another. Stay tuned for that. But Lars, Wassie Lugolobi, three-star linebacker recruit from Washington, goes to Eastside Catholic, has flipped to Stanford. Stanford has taken recruits from Washington in the past, when both were Pac-10, Pac-12 schools. But can you remember the last time a Washington commit just straight up flipped to Stanford?
No, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I mean, no, I really can't.
Yeah.
But I'll add some context, like I told you before the show. So Wassie committed, Eastside Catholic linebacker committed in November after the UCLA game, I want to say. And at the time, Steve Belichick was your defensive coordinator. Robert Balla was your linebackers coach.
Yep.
Wassie, when I talked to him, I want to say maybe like a week or so after that, said that he had a really good relationship with Steve Belichick, was really close with Belichick. Hadn't necessarily got as tight with Balla, but it was like Belichick basically said, like, hey, this is what you're doing in my defense. I'm going to show you how to be up on them. I'm going to show you how to be X, Y. Yeah, it wasn't like how we're going to use you in those sorts of things. And then one of the last questions that I asked him was, hey, like what, barring, the unforeseen, do you expect to like basically be sticky with Washington? He's like, look, the only way I'd back off or reconsider things would be a coaching change.
Sure. Belichick
is now gone in North Carolina and Balla is gone in Florida. And it's not a knock on Ryan Walters or Brian Odom, the new DC and inside linebackers coaches at Washington, for not keeping him. I think it's just a healthy way of saying, you know what? I'm not going to decommit. I'm not going to be drama about it. I'm just going to, kind of let it play out, see if I can meet the new coaches. And then if I want to go somewhere else, I'll go somewhere else. And I think he handled it the right way. And also, like, if you're going to flip to any school on the roster, Stanford's the one where like, okay, check. See, we're good with that. We're good with that. Like, fair.
Right.
Fair.
Oh, I was talking with one of our insiders today who was like, yeah, it's Stanford education. Who's ever going to turn that down? That's one of the things that is certainly a part of that you can never like truly fault a kid for. And, this isn't to say that losing Wassie isn't a loss, because he's a very talented in-state player who hits really hard. I like how versatile he is as a linebacker. But it's just really interesting where, he comes on campus for junior day, and I got a couple questions about it on Twitter. I'm sure you did as well. It's, hey, why was he on campus for junior day and flips, 72 hours later? Is that a bad sign? Or it's exactly what you said. I'm so glad you framed it the way that you did, where it's, hey, I want to come on campus. I want to see what's going on. I want to really have a chance to sit down with some of these new coaches and see what their plan is, not just for me, but for everybody. And if I feel comfortable, because I noted this in an article over on Huskies Wire when it comes to Wassie, is his offer from Stanford came a couple weeks after he committed to Washington. And then shortly after that, he got offered by USC. And then shortly after that, he also got offered by Michigan. And he has an official visit set up with USC as well. So he was already looking around and was having, I don't want to say having second thoughts, but was keeping an open mind as to other possibilities that might arise throughout the process. So I think that's one thing to consider here when it comes to his recruitment, where, again, it's obviously it sucks to have an in-state loss like that with somebody who commits so early on in the process, but it's just when you really step back and look at all of the pieces that were moving around in this case, it makes sense.
Yeah, context matters. Like, that's the entire point of this. And I think also the reason why he came up for the visit was to have a one-on-one with the coaches and say, like, hey, let me get to know Brian Odom. And again, it's not because like, oh wow, Odom, terrible, you big dog. It's right. Nothing that would be nefarious or anything. I think it's it's rare in these days, but it's almost like John Mills, where it's like, okay, like, hey, Texas, I want to go back to Washington. Same thing, where it's okay, like, dang, tough loss for Texas if you're a Texas fan, but can't really blame him. West Coast, got a lot of family ties up here that we're learning about quickly. And so that, it's one of those, okay, can't fault him. Same thing with this, where Wassie, okay, you stuck it through. You didn't just quit and say, oh, Belichick is gone, I'm out. Like, it's because if you're Jedd, the perception of in-state recruits, it's like, well, if you're an offensive guy like Terrence Arian, you're probably not decommitting because, well, all your coaches are still there. But if you're Wassie, different situation, and maybe Ramzak Fruean pops up on Brian Odom's radar a little bit more, and
I had some thoughts there.
And it's kind of, you're going to Tetris the board a little bit, but it's not. This isn't like an indictment on the coaching staff. I wouldn't read it in any way like that. Where it would be actually more concerning if he didn't come up for the junior day and had, like just kind of gone silent or done whatever, or just, flipped in that way, because at least you give the coaches the respect of saying, let me get to meet you. Let me get to see what the plan is. And, I would almost, I don't know this for a fact, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if the coach probably said, like, hey, like, if you want to look elsewhere or whatever, almost like giving you not permission, but it's just kind of like, hey, like, mutual parting of ways in a way where you want to go to Stanford, so be it, but at least you came and had that face-to-face, man-to-man conversation versus just, hey, coach, I'm not really feeling it.
Right.
It's like there's a way to go about this bit, and it's a business. Kids are learning that. It's a way to go about it, and he did it the absolute right way.
Absolutely, because it's something we've had that conversation on this show with somebody who made one of those decisions in Austin Simmons, who's part of the 2025 class, where he told us, hey, yeah, decommitting from Washington State and everything I had to do with that was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. So I'm really glad you framed it that way. That was just something I want to make sure we mentioned. But I want to dive into what this linebacker class could look like without Wassie, because there are a couple names that stand out. Let's start with, some of the lower rated guys, where Eze Tokyo from Oceanside High School in Southern California is one that comes to mind, where I like his film. I think he's a really intriguing prospect, where he's got an elite frame. And I'm saving Ramzak Fruean for last in this case because of I'm just so impressed with his film. But with Eze Tokyo, that's one of those guys where, a lower rated 3-star, but has that elite frame at 6'4", 200 pounds. And all of the pieces are there in terms of, if you let's say you end up taking him and Wassie signs with Stanford, it's something where you can get over that. You can live with that when you look at just what he could bring to the table. And you could say the same thing if you're able to reel in somebody who was on campus this weekend for junior day, like Eze Tokyo, and that's Shaun Scott from Modern Day, where he's listed as an edge right now. He's a 4-star edge on 247 Sports. But in this day and age, he's somebody who I think really could excel as an off-ball linebacker when you watch his film. So I'm curious to see how that recruitment plays out. And maybe, the coaching staff can turn up the heat on him a little bit. And that would be a really nice litmus test for Brian Odom if, he's able to help reel in Shaun Scott and say, hey, get another modern day kid, assuming CJ Lavender, after all the UW crystal balls, jumps in the boat as well. Hey, yeah, we're just really starting to build that pipeline to modern day. That's really solid. And then last but not least is Ramzak Fruean. This is a guy who has really just exploded onto the scene since he arrived in Washington, played at Bethel, played alongside Zedrius Rainey-Saleh in 2024, and is just so impressive. I was talking to our buddy Chris Fetters about him the other day, and I've just taken to calling him a missile on the field. And I'm giving Chris credit for this because he said it first, and I was really mad I didn't think of it. He said, hey, shouldn't his nickname just be Ransack? And I was like, oh my, that was just so perfect. Again, I was so mad for not thinking of it. But 6'4", 205 pounds, just really flies around. And we've talked about it before. He's got the frame and athleticism to play safety if he wants to. Some teams want to play inside linebacker. Some teams said, if you get bigger, we're going to look at you as an edge rusher because you have that kind of talent. So there's a lot going on at the linebacker position just to keep an eye on now that Wassie has officially committed to Stanford. And Lars, just speaking of guys moving around, all these moving parts, there are so many official visits that have been set up after the junior day. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. It was a problem. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. We've also got a message from our friends over at Factor. Looking to optimize your nutrition this year, Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes with 40 options across 8 dietary preferences. Every week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfasts, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. I love how Factor takes the stress out of meal planning. I recently tried their Protein Plus meals, and they were packed with flavor and kept me full throughout the day. The convenience is unbeatable. No prep, no mess, just great food in minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 off and use code LockedOnCollege50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's LockedOnCollege50 off at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Lars, I'm having a lot of trouble here. I need you to help me out. There were, let's just call it 20 official visits. I might be a little too high on the number there that have been set between, the junior day and as we record this on Wednesday. What name sticks out to you the most as, the date, who's coming in around them, just the name itself that says, this is really interesting to me?
So a lot of, actually, it's that between, it's not the last weekend in May, it's that early, I want to say, I'm pulling up the date here. It's the first June weekend.
Yeah. The early June visit's interesting.
Because that last year we had seen it was the May 30th, 29th, 30th weekend when the kid that committed to Oregon and going to Oregon, the tight end.
Vader Plug.
Thank you. Wow, I can't believe I blanked on that one. But that's when all those kids came in, and then you had the June one, the end of June one. This one is interesting because you have Easton Toffa coming up, you have Tristan Umu-Cais coming up, you have Mason James coming up. Mason James is taking his official visit in that June 6th weekend. So not coming up with Brady Smigiel, but did get to see Brady this past weekend. So the reason why that weekend is intriguing is you're looking at a lot of linemen and skill players coming in that weekend, but you don't have the ringleader and you don't have a couple, at least looking at it currently, any current Washington commits that weekend. So to me, it's interesting how some of these are being balanced where you don't have a ton of commits right now, but by the time that weekend comes, will some of those guys turn recruiters because, you're going to have to make some inroads there.
Thanks for the alley-oop there because, one guy who could end up jumping in the boat by that point is the guy we just talked about in the last segment. That's Ramzak Fruean, where he's going to be on that visit weekend. Another guy that I'm really interested in that's coming up that weekend is Jaron Jones, cornerback from Mission Viejo. And then it's rounded out by Kai Wesley, somebody you and I have talked a lot about, the just absolutely massive tight end from Orem High School in Utah. So I'm really curious about this visit weekend where T.I. Umu-Cais is somebody you and I highlighted the second he got his offer. We watched his film and said, that kid is somebody this coaching staff needs. So I like that he's going to be a part of that. Let's see if Easton Toffa takes the visit, as you noted, after he committed to USC on Tuesday. And this is just a really interesting visit weekend for all those reasons, where if one or two of those guys are committed, and maybe we see a couple other ones between now and then set up to get some more commits on that weekend, where there's some more guys that are already committed on that weekend. We've seen some of the coaches already, where they've parsed it out, right? Where CJ Wallace and Adyong Yang have set it up where they're coming up with a group of guys that are uncommitted already. And then we're seeing the same thing with Ansu Sanoa and Terrence Sarian at the end of the month, or at the end of June, that is, where, that's the visit that Brady Smigiel is going to be taking as well, even though it's not listed on 247 Sports. And I'm curious to see if that happens with this weekend, where, maybe T.I. Umu-Cais jumps in the boat a little bit early. If he takes that visit to UCLA and goes to Stanford, that would be a really big one in both of our opinions. Ramzak Fruean being the in-state guy, maybe we see him pull the trigger a little bit sooner. So I'm curious to see what happens on that one. But I think the visit weekend that we really need to talk about I'm curious to see how it's going to shape up, where you talk about the May 30th weekend from last year with all those big time targets where Dylan Robinson was on that weekend and a couple other of major targets, is this April 25th one. because one little piece of background I want to give here is, remember who came up really, really early, reset his official visit from, like, I think it was that May 30th weekend to April 12th, and committed on that visit was Raiden Beinsbright. This is going to be a little different, where right now it's 4 guys. It's 3-star Aaron Thomas, and then a bunch of 4-stars in Sam Utu and Brian Bonner, where that weekend looks like it's going to be really crucial, where I don't think Washington leads for Sam Utu right now. But if, hey, you're able to close on, say, Brian Bonner that weekend, where Anthony Jones has set a commitment date, hey, that's a really nice start to just what's going to be an interesting summer of official visits.
Yeah, and then you got Landon Barnes there as well from Texas. And I think that...
Oh, right, Landon Barnes did join that group, yes.
And I think that... I agree it's an interesting one, because I think the one that intrigues me the most in that is Brian Bonner. Like, do you make it that far? Not that I doubt that you make it that far, but it's like, do you make it that far to where he's uncommitted? And then do you get that commitment that weekend? Because that would be a significant game changer. Because to me, then, because you're looking at one more running back, Antu's already coming in that June weekend, that last June weekend. So you're looking at it and saying, can we just close on our running backs before we get to the end of spring camp? I think that might be the shot that UW is looking for. Sounds like Deshaun Rideau could be headed to USC.
Yeah, he's got those crystal balls.
And so I think that, just reading the tea leaves on that, like, if you lose Rideau but you get Brian Bonner,
it's always, but that's always been the thing, right? Where you and I have had several conversations about this off the record, where it's, hey, you're taking both these guys, and you're not necessarily bringing them up on a visit on the same weekend to say, hey, there's pressure, we need one of you to commit now, because then all of a sudden it's, why are you putting pressure on me? Like, we're both top 100 guys. We have plenty of other high-end suitors, but it's, hey, we just want to show you that we're really interested. This is what it looks like. We love both of you. If there's a world where we can have both of you, great. But we kind of understand what that might be at the end of the day. So that's really interesting. And then, pairing them with probably, especially after Isu Tafa commits to USC, the top offensive lineman on your board in Sam Utu, that just makes it even more important, where it's, hey, yeah, let's pair these guys together. Let's see what that ends up looking like. Because offensive line is getting really interesting in this class. I know I've just used that word a million times over the course of the segment, but I look at that where Aaron Thomas is a guy who I wasn't expecting to see come up on an official visit, especially that early. But after watching his tape, I really like what he brings to the table.
So I'm not surprised that I kind of have to share that sentiment, where I'm not surprised he's scheduled on the official to Washington. Am surprised it's that early, but in a way you have to think, I mean, you have one offensive line commit right now in Adian Yang, and you're looking at saying, okay, how many are you taking up front? Four? Three? Like three? Four? Like, again, maybe 4. Because, again, you took 4 or 5 last year. You have a bunch of young guys on the roster, so you're hoping to still pan out on the development side of things. And when you're selling, hey, like, this is what could be, and you have other schools saying, hey, look at us, it's kind of a, catch-22 position where you got to get the guys on campus, but you're more or less looking at the projectable frames. And so from that, I mean, I would imagine probably U2 goes first, but that's why you're bringing up both of them in the same weekend. Say, hey, like, here's our, like, premium target. Here's your, like, the 2 or 3 guys right below him. And Aaron Thomas is like, hey, you know what? Let me get my spot saved right now. Because, again, if they're bringing him up for an official, they're clearly willing to take a commitment. So they're not going to bring a kid up just to say, oh, wait, you want to commit? Well, hang on a little bit. Hang on a second. Like, you're not doing that. So it clearly shows the level of interest. And Michael Switzer knows the state of Arizona. Obviously, Jedd does as well. But that's one where it's okay. I trust the evaluation size. You'll grow into your body. And I think we've seen plenty of tackles come from Arizona. So I'm sure that'll work itself out.
So I agree with you there. Let's talk about the last offensive lineman who set an official visit right now, because it is looking like it's going to be a smaller class than it was last year, because there's just so much more of a need right now on the defensive line. And that's Dominic Harris, where he's a guy you and I have talked about a lot recently, where you talk about projectable frame, you talk about everything you want for Big Ten play. And Dominic Harris checks all those boxes. I know it's something that Brandon Huffman reported from the Navy All-American Combine, that he's listed at just over 6'8" and 348 pounds. I want to say that it was, where he is just the true definition of a mammoth offensive lineman right now, where you weren't able to pull in, a big raw talent in the 25 class in Elijah Vicona, but maybe you're able to do that this year with a guy who, let's be real, is a little bit more highly touted, where, all due respect to Elijah Ficona, I love his talent. He ended up at USC, so he still ends up at a premier Big Ten program. But right now, Dominic, because I say that with Dominic because he got identified a little bit sooner in the process, where Auburn is interested, Utah is interested. There are just more programs that are going after him right now. And the reason I want to bring him up is all of these programs are going after him because he was first identified by Brennan Carroll in Washington.
Yeah, and I think that's another symptom of, the top end talent, which we'll kind of get to, and then you got this is the floor of the offensive line. Think about that. Like if you think of this is where the floor is, and then you're talking the U2s are the ceilings and Petey Pepe's the ceiling and those sorts of things. That's a pretty good range if you're looking at it, because you're not saying the talent to me doesn't fall off, the projectability doesn't fall off, and it's just a matter of, okay, how, where do you refine the skill set versus is he a 4 or 5 star? I think, you're trusting the development with Fisch, especially the scheme.
Absolutely. Now, Lars, let's talk about the floor of this class, because Washington just finished no lower than probably 30th in this class. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at TurboTax. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you're going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your return their undivided attention as they work on your return, and while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. So Lars, 30th feels like a good floor, right? Where again, this is the bare minimum. Everything goes wrong for one reason or another because Jedd Fisch has talked about, recruiting at a very high level. This whole staff is committed to recruiting at a very high level, and they've done a really good job putting a strong off-field support staff around the guys on the field to make sure that it gets done. But things still happen that sometimes are out of your control. So in that worst case, 30th is the absolute floor.
Yeah, I mean that's being generous. Like it's true, because again, it is the absolute. Like, hey, I guess you can, you're a little bit ankle deep in water at that point, but like, your feet are on the floor, and you're like, okay, that works. But it really should be like a top. I mean, I still think top 25 is kind of a floor in a way, just because. Now again, I understand your perception of like, hey, like maybe the rankings,
sure.
You flip a guy who actually works out, but you don't get the Oregon bump or the Alabama bump and those sorts of things, which, okay, whatever. It's a game you can't control necessarily. But when you look at it and think, like, I just don't see, like, because if you're competing and you're trying to get to the CFP and you had a top 20 class last year, or top 21, whatever it was, like, if you can do that last year off nothing and come in and do all that, like, I think that kind of not sets the floor, but it's almost like if you can hang in the 25s and the 20s, like, in that ballpark, you're good. You should be in the 15s, and hopefully you get into the 10 after a couple of years here. But to me, it's like there should be a top 25 program to recruit you every year. I think that should be the expectation and floor. Like the floor is the expectation, which is top 25 class. Now, where in the top 25, so be it.
Right. So I absolutely agree with you. I'm looking at this from the standpoint of, let's talk about something that, is certainly not controversial at all in terms of, recruiting. It's the rankings. It's what you just said. It's the Alabama bump, the Oregon bump, all those sorts of things where that doesn't happen at Washington. Like I'm scrolling the timeline here because I just saw that Chase Calicut said his official visit to somebody I really like, 4-star defensive back from Texas. There are a couple other guys who, as we look around this class, a couple of guys that I think are criminally underrated. We just talked about them. I think Dominic Harris is one of them. I think Ramzak Fruean is one of them. The guys that we've talked about where it's, hey, we think that these guys well outplay their 3-star ranking. And that's fine, because once you get to college, none of that matters anymore. But from the perception, from the outside perception of what that might look like, that's why I went with top 30, because there's going to be this perception of, oh, it's full of 3 stars, it's this, it's that. But if it's full of these high-end guys that, might not necessarily give you as big of a bump as a high-end 4-star prospect who, maybe at the end of the day, their film looks very, very similar, which is not a discussion we're going to have on this show. But, you trust the talent evaluation, you things work out. you think things are going to work out that way where you miss on a couple of these top end prospects. We're not going to throw any names out there, just, not to say, hey, we think they're way behind on X, Y, or Z. But that's why I went with a little bit more leeway, because another one in that light that I really like is Dakota Dixon. And I think he's a really explosive interior prospect who, as he continues to develop and maybe refine himself as a pass rusher a little bit, is somebody who, let's say he does commit to Washington. He's got Washington has his last official visit on June 20th. And so that's somebody who I like their chances with him as of this point in time. But let's say he doesn't get a bump, right? Where he's listed, I think, somewhere in the mid 600-700s in terms of overall by the 247 Sports composite. If he doesn't bump up and get an extra 5-6 points in the composite score by 247 or whatever, at the end of the day, that's not going to matter because you can watch the film and see what caliber of player you're getting. But from the optics standpoint, people, let's say people who are Ohio State fans or Michigan fans, they're not going to see that because they're just going to say, oh yeah, I see the number 29 ranked recruiting class.
Yeah, well, I think the one name that we're kind of not necessarily omitting, but what carries a lot of weight and what could, give them that bump, if you get Brady Smigiel, top 50 player, like that's one that carries, it's like a hot air balloon where it's going to carry you up a little bit. And I think that those are the types of additions where, you're not going to have the entire class be 4 stars and a couple of 5 stars. But if you can get a 5/borderline, a high 4, add another, call it, half dozen 4 stars to, 8
I think you need more than that.
Probably like, I'm saying like 6 to 12, like half 6 to a half dozen to a dozen 4 stars. And then you sprinkle in some 3 stars. That's where you get that 18, 17, 16 versus if you're in the 25s, which again, I think that's the floor. And I'm with you on negotiating it down to 30 just because of the, optics, and no offense to CJ Wallace, but like, scholarship kicker, it's kind of like, he's not going to get a bump beyond, like he could be a 5-star kicker. You ain't going to get a 5-star.
For the people that really rank him, yeah.
Right, exactly. But it's like those don't necessarily count where it's, okay, you got to factor some of those guys in. And then, like Aaron Thomas getting, underrated, Dominic Harris being underrated, Sonny Giles, I think, could be underrated. You look at some of those guys, and I think as long as you're in the discussion and as long as the guys that you get committed from have a decent offer list, which all the guys do, that I think matters more. Now, again, yes, the perception of the optics are going to be, like let's say like you're competing in the CFP and you're against Tennessee, let's say in the first round, and they're going to put all the matchups up and say, here's where their recruiting rankings are, and here's where they're playing, here's their CFP ranking, and here's their recruiting ranking. It's like Washington, right. How did they make it in at number 28 or 29? And it's like, because they're not number 28 or 29, but God forbid the recruiting rankings actually get accurate.
Well, we saw that 2 years ago in the national championship. It was, this is like the lowest blue chip ratio to make a national championship in however long. Like we've seen that before, which is part of this, where at the end of the day, we saw what Chris Peterson did with some of the, more under-realized recruiting ranked teams. We'll see if Jedd Fisch, is able to do that. I think that Jedd has the right balance, and we've talked about this before, the right balance of being able to recruit truly elite talent where it's not just the actual talent that you're getting, but the optics of it. The Tatiro McMillans, where that was, still to this day, his biggest accomplishment as a head coach in terms of recruiting. So that's one of those things, though, that you need to have at Washington is you need to be able to reel in some of those elite players where let's take it back to somebody we mentioned a little bit earlier, T.I. Umu-Cais. That's a dude where I watch his film and I say, that kid is going to be should be a 4-star prospect in terms of the offer list that he has, the way he plays, all of that. That's where it should be. And if he commits to Washington and never gets a 4th star, it's not going to matter at the end of the day because you know what kind of player he's getting. But somebody else isn't going to see that, which is a frustrating part of this. And why, because I don't want to sit here and act like we're saying, hey, you need to lower your expectations for Washington, because that's not the case. That's not what you and I talk about, because that's just frankly unacceptable. Washington has the ability to pull in top 15 classes, the ability to go to the national championship, the ability to send people to New York for the Heisman Trophy ceremony, because those are all things that we've seen. But you have to, I'm just kind of, my whole thought process here is you have to keep in mind some of the external factors that might prohibit it from looking a certain way at times.
Yeah, and I think the external factors matter to like a vocal minority of people. I think the difference is it's what is the quality of prospect. Like I wish there was like a separate recruiting ranking for like, like quality of recruit, where you look and say like, okay, this is like because and first of all, it's all projectability because she's like, oh hey, like they have the number one ranked recruiting class. It's like great. Do you think Lincoln's gonna do anything with that? No. Like like no offense here, but like it doesn't necessarily. You can have like how many SEC schools have top 10 recruiting classes and don't do squat with it. Now when I say don't do squat, like yeah, you might win 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, exactly. But you're not winning anything. You are not winning squat. And so to me, it's what can you do with the talent that you have, which Jedd clearly shows. Like, hey, like I can make a lot happen now, and it's it's an interesting situation because you're coming off a 6th and 7th season. So maybe if they're 8 and 4 last season, maybe the recruiting momentum is even higher. But that's again, whatever. Make it happen this year. Go 10 and 2 this year and see what happens. And I think all these things are in play to where everything that like you mentioned, the infrastructure is there, the coaching is there, the Seattle is there. Like everything is there for you. You just have to capitalize on it. I think fans will be surprised. Fans will be pleasantly surprised with how the class turns out. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's the other thing where we're setting a minimum expectation. So when this class works out in the way that you and I have heard in ways we can't necessarily always share, there's a lot to be excited about with this class. And you just have to keep an eye on it because Lars, it's March 12th right now as we record this. Things are going to change drastically between now and let's just call it the end of June. So that's when we can really sit back and reassess and say, hey, did everything work out the way that it might have supposed to be? Everything like that. But the best way for everybody to make sure that they're in tune with everything that's going on is subscribing right here on Locked On Huskies. As always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to everybody who's tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So again, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.